"Stop, that's my wife." A millionaire screams when he sees a homeless woman being bullied in the street. Everyone freezes. Who is she really? And why would a powerful man risk everything for someone the world has already thrown away? At first, she looks like just another forgotten soul. But when he steps in, the truth begins to unravel, a truth that ties her to him in ways no one expected. Behind her hunger and torn clothes is a story of betrayal, buried love, and secrets money can't hide. As whispers spread and danger closes in, the question becomes deadly clear. Is she truly the woman he lost, or a stranger who will cost him everything? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The community center buzzed with excitement, its freshly painted walls adorned with colorful banners celebrating the opening of the Graham Whitaker Literacy Wing. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rows of eager faces, parents, teachers, and local officials who had gathered for the dedication ceremony. At the front, a group of schoolchildren stood arranged in neat rows, their blue choir robes catching the light. In the back row, 16-year-old Tessa Ortiz shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tight around her music folder. The robe felt too snug across her shoulders, making her even more self-conscious than usual. She tried to focus on the sheet music, but couldn't ignore the whispers from two girls standing nearby. "Look at her. That robe is about to burst," one girl muttered with a smirk. "She looks like a blueberry." The other added with a quiet laugh that felt like a punch to Tessa's stomach. The choir director raised her hands, and Tessa forced herself to stand straighter, willing her voice not to shake as they began to sing. Through the first two songs, she managed to keep her composure, even as she noticed phones pointed her way, more suppressed giggles. As the applause died down and the choir began to disperse, Tessa thought she might escape unscathed. But Madison, one of the girls who had been whispering, stepped directly into her path, holding out a chocolate cupcake with thick frosting. "Here's some practice for you," Madison sneered, shoving the cupcake into Tessa's hands. "Since eating is what you do best, right?" Laughter erupted around her. Tessa's vision blurred with tears as the cupcake crumbled in her trembling grip. Without thinking, she turned and ran, pushing through a side door into a quieter hallway. Her footsteps echoed against the tiles as tears streamed down her face, the crushed cupcake falling from her hands. In her rush to escape, she didn't see the tall figure rounding the corner until it was too late. She collided with what felt like a brick wall, strong hands steadying her before she could fall. Looking up through her tears, she found herself face to face with Graham Whitaker himself, his silver hair and broad shoulders instantly recognizable from the dedication ceremony photos. "I'm sorry," Tessa choked out, trying to step back, but the kind concern in his weathered face broke something inside her. "I'm too fat to be adopted," she sobbed, the words spilling out before she could stop them, carrying years of rejection and pain. Graham's face softened, his hands still gentle on her shoulders. "No one's too anything to be loved, sweetheart," he said quietly, his voice rough but tender. "What's your name?" The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Graham guided Tessa to a nearby bench in the quiet hallway. Her face was blotchy from crying, and she kept her gaze fixed on her hands, which twisted nervously in her lap. The choir robes she wore seemed to swallow her whole as she tried to make herself smaller on the bench. "Take your time," Graham said gently, his voice carrying decades of kindness beneath its gruff exterior. He pulled out a clean handkerchief from his suit pocket and offered it to her. Tessa dabbed at her eyes, her breath still hitching slightly. "My current foster placement ends next week," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Klein, she's my caseworker. She's been trying, but She swallowed hard. Nobody wants a fat teenager. That's what they all say. Not in those exact words, but I can tell. They look at me and just. She made a dismissive gesture with her hand. Graham felt a familiar ache in his chest. The absence of Emily, his late wife, who had always dreamed of fostering children. She would have known exactly what to say to this bright young girl who had been hurt so deeply. Emily had always said their big house was too empty, that it needed the sound of children's laughter. Without fully processing what he was about to do, Graham pulled out his phone. "What did you say your caseworker's name was?" "Mrs. Klein," Tessa answered, confusion crossing her face. "But why?" Graham was already dialing the child services office. After a brief conversation with the receptionist, he was connected to Mrs. Klein herself. Tessa watched with wide eyes as Graham introduced himself and firmly stated his intention to begin the emergency foster-to-adopt process. Mrs. Klein's surprise was evident even through the phone. "Mr. Whitaker, while I appreciate your interest, there are several steps we need to discuss." "Then let's discuss them," Graham interrupted, his contractor's efficiency taking over. "I have a 5-bedroom house, a steady income, and I'm willing to take whatever classes you require. This young lady needs a home, and I have one to offer." Tessa sat frozen beside him, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. She'd heard too many empty promises before to fully trust what was happening, but something about Graham's determined tone made her heart flutter with hope. As they walked out of the community center later, Graham spotted a vendor stand selling art supplies. Without hesitation, he purchased a high-quality sketchpad and set of pencils, handing them to Tessa. "You don't need new clothes," he said firmly. "You need space for your dreams." Tessa hugged the sketchpad to her chest, feeling its clean, crisp pages against her heart. She closed her eyes briefly, sending up a silent prayer that this wasn't just another cruel joke, that this gruff but kind man really meant what he said. The weight of the sketchpad in her arms felt real enough, but she'd learned the hard way that good things had a way of disappearing. Saturday morning brought with it a pale autumn sun that barely warmed the tired neighborhood where Darla Green's small house sagged between overgrown shrubs. Graham's truck looked out of place among the weathered vehicles lining the street as he pulled up to the curb. Tessa stood on the cracked concrete steps, clutching a half-packed duffel bag that had seen better days. Darla Green hovered in the doorway, her thin face a mask of weary relief. "Her paperwork's all in the bag," she called out, already turning back inside. "Good luck to you both." The screen door banged shut before Tessa could even say goodbye. She shuffled toward Graham's truck, her shoulders hunched as if expecting the whole thing to vanish like a mirage. "Ready for a new adventure?" Graham asked, helping her with the duffel bag. His gruff voice held a gentleness that made Tessa's throat tight. The drive to Graham's house was quiet but comfortable. When they pulled up to the big white farmhouse, Tessa's eyes widened. Paint peeled around the window frames, and the porch needed repairs, but it felt solid, real. "It's a bit rough around the edges," Graham admitted, "but it's home." Inside, Tessa explored with careful steps, as if afraid to disturb the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. The kitchen was huge, with worn countertops and a massive old stove that spoke of countless family meals. "How about we try making cinnamon rolls?" Graham suggested, pulling out a cookbook that had clearly seen better days. "Emily's recipe, my late wife's. Fair warning though, I'm not much of a baker." They made a mess of the kitchen, flour dusting their clothes, and sticky dough refusing to cooperate. But somewhere between Graham's muttered complaints about measuring cups and Tessa's giggle when the cinnamon went everywhere, the tension began to ease. Maya Bennett arrived just as they were pulling slightly lopsided rolls from the oven. She stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand, taking in the scene with raised eyebrows. "Graham, can we talk?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. In the hall, her whispered words carried anyway. "Are you sure about this? Foster care isn't something you test drive. That girl's been through enough without more broken promises." "I know what I'm doing, Maya," Graham replied firmly. "Emily always wanted this. Maybe she knew better than I did what this house needed." Sunday morning found them at the local church, where Pastor Ruth's face lit up at the sight of Tessa. "We could use some help with the hymnals," she said warmly, placing a gentle hand on Tessa's shoulder. "Would you mind?" Tessa nodded, surprised by how natural it felt to help, to be included without conditions. Pastor Ruth's kind eyes and easy manner made her feel seen in a way that was both frightening and wonderful. That evening, the house settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Tessa curled up on one end of the worn couch, her sketchpad balanced on her knees, as she drew flowing dresses that existed only in her imagination. Graham sat at the other end, an old Western playing quietly on the television. In the blue glow of the screen, Graham looked at Tessa's absorbed expression, then up at the ceiling. "Emily," he whispered, so softly Tessa didn't hear. "I'm trying." The Monday morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Graham's downtown office, casting long shadows across the polished conference table. Mrs. Klein sat across from him, her neat gray suit matching her practical demeanor as she spread out fostering paperwork with methodical precision. "Everything seems to be in order for the emergency placement," she said, checking another box on her form. "But there's something else I need to show you." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a worn manila folder, its edge marked with familiar handwriting that made Graham's heart skip a beat. "Emily's handwriting," he breathed, reaching for the folder with trembling fingers. "Where did you find this?" "It was in our archived files. When Tessa's name came across my desk for your fostering application, something clicked." Mrs. Klein's eyes softened. "Your wife had quite an eye for seeing potential in children others overlooked." Tessa, who had been quietly sketching in the corner of Graham's office, looked up at the mention of Emily's name. She moved closer as Graham opened the folder. Inside was a letter, written in Emily's flowing script, dated 2 years ago. Graham's throat tightened as he read aloud. "Regarding the Creative Futures Mentorship Program, I'd like to recommend Tessa Ortiz, age 14. Her design portfolio shows remarkable promise, and her spirit, despite facing constant criticism about her weight, remains unbroken. She needs someone to believe in her talent." Graham's voice cracked. Tessa stood frozen, her sketchpad forgotten in her hands. Mrs. Klein quietly passed her a tissue. "Someone noticed me?" Tessa whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Even back then? I remember wanting to apply for that program so badly, but my foster mom at the time said it wasn't worth the effort." Graham cleared his throat, fighting back his own emotions. Emily had a way of seeing right into people's hearts. She would have loved to know you're here now. Mrs. Klein watched them with gentle understanding. Sometimes, the right paths take unexpected turns to reach their destination. Later that night, in Graham's kitchen, Tessa carefully smoothed out Emily's letter while Graham searched for magnets. Together, they pinned it to the refrigerator, right at eye level where it couldn't be missed. "You see this?" Graham said softly, his hand resting on Tessa's shoulder. "This was meant to be. Emily knew it before any of us did." He paused, looking at the letter that seemed to glow in the warm kitchen light. "This was meant to be, Tessa. You were meant to be here. The shaky cell phone video opened with Tessa colliding into Graham at the community center. The camera caught their entire exchange, including her tearful confession and his gentle response. Within hours, the 15-second clip had spread across social media like wildfire, accompanied by the caption, "Millionaire adopts fat teen instantly." Comments flooded in from all directions. Many praised Graham's compassion. "This made me cry happy tears. Finally, someone seeing past appearances. We need more people like this man." But darker responses lurked beneath. Obvious PR stunt. Who adopts a kid that fast? Sketchy. Bet he's just doing this for tax breaks. By Wednesday morning, the local news stations had picked up the story. Evan Pierce, known for his hard-hitting exposés, wasted no time publishing a scathing article on the front page of the Capital City Tribune's website, "Millionaire's Instant Adoption, Compassion or Calculation," by Evan Pierce. In an age where viral moments can make or break reputations, Graham Whitaker's spontaneous decision to adopt a teenage girl raises troubling questions. Sources close to the situation describe the choice as impulsive and potentially dangerous. With Whitaker Construction's recent bid for the city's largest development project pending, one must question the timing of this supposedly charitable act. The article went on to quote anonymous sources, questioning Graham's motives and capability to parent. Pierce had even dug up old interviews where Graham had stated he never planned to have children after Emily's death. The storm hit its peak when Child Services called an emergency meeting. The department supervisor, stern-faced behind her desk, explained that they needed to freeze the expedited adoption process pending a full investigation. "We've received numerous concerns about the hasty nature of this placement," she said, shuffling through a stack of printed emails. "While Mr. Whitaker's intentions may be pure, we cannot ignore proper protocols." That evening, Graham's kitchen felt colder than usual as he set the table for dinner. Tessa had spent the afternoon working on a new dress design, her pencil moving across the paper with nervous energy. The pasta Graham made sat mostly untouched between them. "Tessa," he said, finally, his voice heavy, "I need to tell you something about the adoption process." She looked up, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. The fear in her eyes made his heart ache. "Child Services has temporarily frozen things while they investigate." He tried to keep his voice steady. "Some people are questioning my motives because of that video." The fork clattered against her plate as it slipped from her fingers. "I knew it was too good to be true," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Graham reached across the table, taking her trembling hand in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly, his eyes fierce with determination. "We'll fight this. You're not going back to being unwanted, not ever again." The Tuesday morning sky hung gray and heavy as Graham's truck pulled up to Lincoln Heights High School. He glanced at Tessa in the passenger seat, watching her grip her backpack tighter. Thanks to Mrs. Klein's intervention, they'd been granted supervised temporary stays while the investigation continued. "You sure you're okay going in today?" Graham asked softly. Tessa nodded, though her knuckles were white around the backpack straps. "Can't hide forever, right?" Graham walked her to her first class, noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. The standard-issue desks pinched against Tessa's sides. Students whispered behind their hands as she passed. One girl deliberately pulled her bag closer when Tessa walked by. "Text me if you need anything," Graham said, fighting the urge to pull her back to the safety of home. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table, pushing around the remains of a chicken pot pie. Tessa had been quiet since he picked her up, but finally, the words spilled out. "In PE today," she began, staring at her plate, Coach Martinez made us run the mile. Everyone else finished in 12 minutes. I came in last at 20 minutes. Her voice cracked. The boys made wheezing noises when I passed them. Graham's hands tightened around his fork, but he stayed silent, letting her talk. And last month, at my physical, the doctor didn't even look at me, just wrote obesity on his chart and lectured about willpower. Tears slid down her cheeks. He didn't ask about my straight A's, or my art, or anything. Like, I'm just this body that needs fixing. Graham set down his fork. You deserve better, he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. Better doctors, better teachers, better classmates. And you deserve a home where you feel safe. Tessa wiped her eyes. Really? Really? He pulled out a notepad. Which is why I think it's time we made this kitchen yours too. How about we convert that corner into your own baking station? For the next 2 hours, they sketched layouts together. Tessa's eyes lit up as she described her dream setup. A lowered countertop for easier kneading, deep drawers for baking sheets, a special shelf for her recipe collection. Graham added practical suggestions about electrical outlets and ventilation, making notes in his precise contractor's handwriting. As the evening wore on, they moved to the living room. Tessa curled up on the couch, surrounded by their kitchen sketches, adding little details. A hook for her aprons, a magnetic strip for measuring, spoons. Her pencil moved slower and slower until it finally stilled, her breathing deep and even. Graham carefully gathered the scattered papers, smiling at her neat notes in the margins. He found the old patchwork quilt Emily had made and gently draped it over Tessa's sleeping form. You belong here, he whispered, smoothing a strand of hair from her face. He meant it with every fiber of his being. Viral videos and investigations be damned. Saturday morning brought sunshine streaming through the stained glass windows of First Grace Church. Pastor Ruth bustled around the fellowship hall, directing volunteers who carried in boxes of donated clothes and fabric. 3 sewing machines sat ready on folding tables, surrounded by pincushions and measuring tapes. Lord knows every girl deserves clothes that make her feel beautiful, Pastor Ruth announced, setting up a makeshift changing area with portable screens. Her gray hair caught the light as she arranged chairs in a semicircle. When Graham's truck pulled up, Tessa hesitated at the entrance. I don't want to be a bother, she whispered. Nonsense. Pastor Ruth swept over, enveloping Tessa in a warm hug that smelled of peppermint and coffee. We've got seamstresses who've been altering wedding dresses for 40 years. This is what community does. Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Rodriguez, the church's most experienced sewists, got to work. They took Tessa's measurements with gentle hands, murmuring encouragement. Other volunteers sorted through donations, pulling out pieces with potential. But it was the simple blue cotton fabric that caught Tessa's eye. She ran her fingers over it shyly. I actually drew a design, she started. Show us, dear, Mrs. Chen encouraged. Tessa pulled out her sketchpad. The dress she designed was elegant in its simplicity. Cap sleeves, a sweetheart neckline, and a skirt that would swish when she walked. The seamstress's eyes lit up. For the next 3 hours, they worked together, teaching Tessa as they went. She learned to pin darts and press seams, her face glowing with concentration. When she emerged from behind the screen, wearing the finished dress, the room fell silent. The blue fabric complemented her skin perfectly, and the cut emphasized her natural grace. Tessa stood straighter, a tentative smile playing at her lips. Then Pastor Ruth started clapping, and the whole room joined in. Graham, who had been helping move boxes, fumbled for his phone with misty eyes. Spin for us, sweetheart, he called out. Tessa twirled, the skirt floating around her knees. Graham captured the moment on video, her genuine laugh, the way sunlight caught her dark hair, the pure joy radiating from her face. Later that afternoon, while Tessa helped pack up with the ladies, Graham drove to Riverside Cemetery. He knelt by Emily's grave, laying down fresh daisies, her favorite. "She's changing me as much as I'm changing her, Em," he confessed quietly, touching the cool stone. "Remember how I used to say I was too busy for family time? Now I can't wait to get home each day." That evening, Graham and Tessa sat on the couch, both tired but content. "Should we try that prayer thing Pastor Ruth suggested?" Graham asked awkwardly, "for our nightly routine?" They clasped hands, and Graham cleared his throat. "Dear Lord, thank you for the nice ladies at church, and the dress, and," he stumbled, feeling self-conscious. Tessa squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she whispered, smiling. "God knows. We need groceries," Graham announced casually one Saturday afternoon, jingling his keys. "Want to come along?" Tessa looked up from her sketchbook, where she'd been working on a new dress design. "Sure," she said, slipping on her shoes. She'd gotten used to these little outings with Graham, finding comfort in their ordinary nature. But instead of turning left toward Thompson's Market, Graham's truck headed toward home. Tessa frowned, puzzled. "Did you forget something?" "You could say that," Graham replied with a mysterious smile. As they pulled into the driveway, Tessa noticed Maya's silver sedan and Pastor Ruth's old station wagon parked out front. Her heart started beating faster. "What's going on?" Graham just grinned and led her to the front door. When he opened it, the smell of fresh paint and new fabric wafted out. Mrs. Klein stood in the hallway, beaming, while Maya and Pastor Ruth peeked around the corner. "Close your eyes," Graham instructed gently. Tessa squeezed them shut, letting Graham guide her up the stairs. She heard the creak of a door opening and someone's excited intake of breath. "Okay. Open them." Tessa's eyes flew wide. Her old guest room had been transformed. A beautiful wooden canopy bed with sturdy posts dominated one wall, draped with soft purple curtains. A professional drafting table sat beneath the window, complete with an adjustable lamp and organized supplies. Along another wall, a massive corkboard bore the word "Future" in elegant letters, ready to hold her dreams and designs. "Oh," she breathed. Then again, "Oh." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she spun slowly, taking it all in. The bedspread matched her sketches perfectly. The chair at the drafting table was sized just for her. Everything spoke of thought, of care, of permanence. She turned to Graham, overwhelmed. "Dad, it's perfect." The word slipped out before she could catch it, and she froze. But Graham's face split into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. Pastor Ruth chuckled warmly, and Maya wiped at her eyes. Mrs. Klein clapped her hands together in delight. "I ordered pizza," Maya announced, breaking the emotional moment. "Extra cheese, just how you like it." They all sat cross-legged on the new carpet, passing paper plates and napkins. Tessa couldn't stop looking around, touching things to make sure they were real. She'd never had a room that was truly hers, designed just for her. Later, after everyone had gone home and the pizza boxes were cleared away, Graham came to say goodnight. Tessa was already in her new bed, still running her fingers over the soft comforter in wonder. "I don't want to wake up and lose this," she whispered as he pulled the covers up around her shoulders. Graham's face grew serious. "You won't," he promised firmly. "Not if I have breath." Monday morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Graham's office as he reviewed blueprints for a new community center. The peaceful moment shattered when Maya burst through the door, her usually composed face tight with worry. "Graham, we have a problem," she said, tablet clutched in her hands. "Evan Pierce has been digging. He found the Henderson settlement documents from 10 years ago." Graham's stomach dropped. He remembered that day all too well, the accident that had haunted him for years, even though investigations had cleared his company of fault. "What exactly does he have?" Graham asked, his voice rough. Maya pulled up the article on her tablet. "He's twisted everything. Look at this headline. Local millionaire's history of buying silence. What's he hiding now?" She read aloud sections of the piece. "Pierce claims you used your money to sweep worker safety concerns under the rug. He's connected it to Tessa's adoption, suggesting it's another case of you throwing money at problems." Graham's hands gripped his desk. "We followed every safety protocol on that site. Henderson wasn't wearing his required harness. The investigation proved that." "I know," Maya said softly, "but Pierce found the settlement papers where you paid the family $300,000 to avoid a court battle, because Sarah Henderson had 3 kids to feed." Graham's voice rose. "Her husband made a terrible mistake, but those children shouldn't have suffered more than they already had." The situation grew worse as the morning progressed. Someone had edited security footage from the accident's aftermath, cutting it to show only moments where Graham appeared stern and businesslike, removing the hours he'd spent with the family at the hospital. By afternoon, the clip had gone viral. Comments flooded social media. "Money can't buy a conscience. Poor Tessa, she's just his latest PR stunt. Once a corporate shark, always a shark." Graham sent everyone home early, unable to focus on work. He sat in his darkened living room that night, watching the twisted version of events play out on the evening news. His fists clenched as Pierce's smug face filled the screen, speculating about what other secrets might be buried in Graham's past. The house felt heavy with silence, but then a soft scratching sound came from the hallway. Graham muted the television, listening. After a moment, quiet footsteps padded away from his door. When he opened it, he found a still warm cinnamon roll on a plate, clearly one of Tessa's creations. Beside it lay a note in her careful handwriting. "Don't let them lie about who you are." Graham picked up the plate with trembling hands, the simple act of kindness piercing straight through his anger and hurt. The cinnamon roll was slightly lopsided, just like all of Tessa's baking attempts, but made with such obvious care it brought tears to his eyes. He stood in the doorway, holding this proof of trust and love, while the muted television continued to flash its accusations behind him. The whispers followed Tessa through the school hallways like persistent shadows. "Did you hear? Her dad just bought her to look good. Total charity case." Each word stung like tiny paper cuts, leaving invisible wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. In the cafeteria, she pushed her lunch aside, stomach too knotted to eat. Her phone buzzed with another news alert about Graham's company losing another sponsor for the literacy center. The headline screamed, "Local businesses distance themselves from controversial builder." At home that afternoon, Tessa threw herself into baking with desperate energy. The kitchen counter disappeared under a sea of cupcakes, chocolate, vanilla, red velvet, each one frosted with careful precision, as if perfect swirls could somehow make up for the mess their lives had become. "What's all this?" Graham asked, stepping into the flour-dusted kitchen. "I'm sorry," Tessa whispered, piping bag trembling in her hands. "Maybe if I make enough apology cupcakes, people will stop being mad at you for taking me in." Graham's face crumpled. He reached for his truck keys, ready to drive straight to the school and give those gossips a piece of his mind. But his phone rang, Pastor Ruth, as if she could sense his anger building. "I know you want to fight back," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But remember what we talked about in service last Sunday? We fight lies with truth, not fists. Let your actions speak louder than their words. At church that Wednesday evening, the divide was clear as glass. Some members hurried past with averted eyes, while others made a point of hugging Tessa extra tight. Mrs. Jenkins, who'd lost her husband last spring, pressed a casserole into Graham's hands. "For my favorite neighbors," she said loudly enough for others to hear. But the weight of judgment grew heavier. That night, Graham heard muffled sniffles coming from Tessa's room. He found her hunched over her sketchpad, tears splashing onto half-finished dress designs. The page was crumpled where she'd tried to erase too hard, leaving ghost marks of earlier attempts. "I ruined everything," she choked out. "Your reputation, the literacy center, everything you worked for." Graham didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders, holding her close as she cried. "Listen to me," he said fiercely. "You haven't ruined a single thing. We're in this storm together, and that's exactly where I want to be." Tessa clutched his shirt, her tears soaking through to his skin. Through the window, distant thunder rolled across the sky, but in that room, father and daughter held onto each other like anchors in the storm. The mahogany walls of the courtroom seemed to close in around them as Judge Collins adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. His stern gaze moved between Graham and the stack of papers before him, each rustle echoing through the tense silence. "Mr. Whitaker," Judge Collins began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench, "while your intentions appear honorable, the current media circus surrounding this case raises serious concerns." He paused, fingers drumming against the polished wood. "The court must consider not just the immediate welfare of the child, but also the public perception of our foster system." Graham's shoulders stiffened. Beside him, Tessa sat perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She wore the blue dress from the church clothing swap, carefully pressed for court, though now it was wrinkled from hours of anxious sitting. "Given the circumstances and pending investigation," Judge Collins continued, "I am issuing a temporary no-contact order for 30 days. The words fell like stones in still water. "The minor will return to her previous foster placement until we can properly evaluate this situation." Tessa's breath caught audibly. Graham started to protest, but his lawyer touched his arm, silently warning him to stay quiet. Back at home, Tessa moved through her room like a ghost, gathering essential items into her duffel bag. Her hands trembled as she wrapped a still warm cinnamon roll in wax paper, tying it carefully with a blue ribbon from her sewing box. Beside it, she placed a sketch she'd worked on late into the night, herself and Graham sitting on the farmhouse porch, rocking chairs side by side, the word "home" written in her best lettering across the top. Graham stood in the doorway, watching her pack, his face etched with pain he couldn't hide. "30 days, he said hoarsely. "We'll get through this, sweetheart. I promise." Tessa nodded, not trusting herself to speak. When Mrs. Klein arrived to drive her back to Darla's, Tessa left her gifts on Graham's desk without a word. She couldn't bear to look back as she walked to the car, knowing if she did, she might break completely. Graham watched from the window, tears burning his eyes as the car pulled away. His hand pressed against the glass, as if he could somehow reach through it and bring her back. The cinnamon roll and sketch on his desk felt like physical proof of everything he stood to lose. At Darla's house, nothing had changed. The same tired curtains hung in the windows, the same faint smell of microwave dinners lingered in the air. Darla barely looked up from her television show as Tessa trudged upstairs to her old room. The door closed with a quiet click that felt oddly final. Tessa sat on the thin mattress, carefully sliding the creased sketch under her pillow. In the growing darkness, she clasped her hands together, her whispered prayer barely audible. Please, God, don't let this be the end. The digital clock on Tessa's phone glowed 2:15 in the morning, but sleep felt impossible. She lay in the narrow bed at Darla's house, scrolling through Evan Pierce's article for the 100th time. The harsh blue light illuminated her tear-stained face as she read the cruel words again. Graham Whitaker's latest PR stunt, buying a teen's trust. Each paragraph twisted Graham's kindness into something ugly. The reporter painted him as a calculating businessman, using a vulnerable foster kid to boost his image. The words made her stomach hurt, but she couldn't stop reading. Dawn crept in through the thin curtains, painting the walls a soft gray. Tessa sat up, wiping her eyes with determination. She propped her phone against a stack of books on the dresser, adjusted the angle, and pressed record. "Hi," she began, her voice shaky but growing stronger. "I'm Tessa Ortiz. You might have seen me in that viral video with Graham Whitaker, the one where people say he bought himself a fat foster kid for publicity." She took a deep breath. "But that's not what happened. He didn't buy me. He saw me." Her hands trembled as she pulled out Emily's letter, carefully unfolding the paper she'd brought from Graham's house. "This is a letter written 2 years ago by Emily Whitaker, Graham's late wife. She noticed me back then, when nobody else did." Tessa's voice cracked as she read Emily's words about her artistic talent and kind heart. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she kept going. "Every night, I make a prayer list. Want to know what's on it?" She held up a worn notebook. "For a dad who chooses me when it's messy. Who doesn't try to fix me, but loves me exactly as I am. Who teaches me that being worthy of love isn't about size or shape or perfect behavior." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Graham Whitaker is that dad. He's not perfect. He burns toast and tells bad jokes and sometimes says the wrong thing. But he chooses me every single day, even when it costs him everything. At Graham's farmhouse, Maya burst through the door without knocking, laptop in hand. "Graham, you need to see this." She found him at the kitchen table, staring at Tessa's empty chair. They watched together as Tessa's unfiltered testimony spread across social media. Comments poured in by the thousands. "This is what real love looks like. Made me cry." Finally, the truth. Graham's weathered face crumpled as he watched Tessa defend him with such raw honesty. Tears flowed freely down his cheeks. "That's my girl," he whispered, touching the screen where her face smiled through tears. "That's my girl." The courtroom buzzed with tension as people filed in for the reconvened hearing. Tessa sat rigid beside Mrs. Klein, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Graham kept glancing her way from the opposite table, trying to offer an encouraging smile despite his own nervousness. Maya strode purposefully to the front, laptop in hand. "Your Honor, I have evidence that directly contradicts the edited footage that's been circulating." She connected her computer to the courtroom's display system. "This is the complete video from the construction site incident." The unedited footage played, showing Graham not as a callous businessman, but as someone devastated by the accident. In the full version, he was seen organizing emergency response teams, staying with injured workers until ambulances arrived, and promising to take care of their families. One by one, former employees took the stand. A gray-haired carpenter described how Graham had paid for his wife's funeral when insurance wouldn't cover it. A young woman, now a teacher, tearfully recalled how Graham had rebuilt her parents' home after a storm and paid for her college tuition. "He didn't just write checks," she explained, her voice thick with emotion. "He showed up every weekend to help with the rebuilding. He tutored me in math when I was struggling. That's who Graham Whitaker really is." Pastor Ruth approached the bench next, her weathered face serene. Your Honor, I've known Graham Whitaker for 20 years. Love isn't about photo ops or press releases. It's about showing up. It's about choosing someone every single day, especially when it's hard. She turned to look at Graham and Tessa. That's what I've witnessed between these two souls. Darla Green shifted uncomfortably in her seat before taking the stand. Her testimony surprised everyone. Look, I'm not the warmest foster parent, she admitted bluntly, but I've never seen Tessa like this before. She used to hide in her room, wouldn't talk to anyone. Now, Darla shook her head in wonder. She bakes, she draws, she smiles. Whatever Graham's doing, it's working. The most unexpected moment came when Evan Pierce requested to address the court. The journalist looked humbled, his usual sharp demeanor softened. I was wrong, he stated simply. I came looking for scandal, and I missed the real story. Tessa's video showed me what genuine love looks like. I owe both her and Mr. Whitaker a public apology. Judge Collins listened to it all, his expression unreadable. When the last testimony concluded, he sat in silence for a long moment, reviewing his notes. The whole courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he looked up, his stern face softening slightly. In all my years on the bench, I've seen many claims of love. But actions speak louder than words. He picked up his gavel. The adoption is approved. The crack of the gavel had barely sounded when Tessa leaped from her chair. She ran to Graham, who caught her in a fierce embrace. They clung to each other, both crying and laughing at the same time. Dad, she whispered into his shoulder. We did it. The autumn sunshine spilled across the courthouse steps as people spilled out onto the wide plaza. Someone had tied multicolored balloons to the railings. Some shiny and new, others slightly deflated from dollar stores. The mismatched collection somehow made it feel more genuine, more like family. Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down balanced a steaming green bean casserole in her arms. Behind her, Mr. Lee from the corner market carried a tower of pizza boxes. Church members gathered in small clusters, their voices rising in familiar hymns that floated on the crisp breeze. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The melody wrapped around them like a warm embrace. Tessa couldn't stop smiling as neighbors patted her back and squeezed her hands. The local bakery had delivered dozens of cinnamon rolls, the sweet scent mixing with the savory aromas of home-cooked dishes. Graham cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. Tessa, I have something for you. He unveiled a wooden plaque, carved with elegant letters. The Whitaker as You Are Culinary and Design Studio, where everybody has a place to create. Tessa's eyes widened as Graham explained. It's going to be a space for young people to bake and design clothes. No judgment, no shame, just creativity and community. Sign me up to volunteer, called Mrs. Patterson, the retired home economics teacher. Others quickly joined in, raising their hands and calling out offers to help. Standing before the gathering crowd, Tessa gripped the ceremonial scissors in one hand, her other hand firmly clasped in Graham's. With joy radiating from her face, she cut the red ribbon to enthusiastic applause. The evening settled softly around Graham's farmhouse, painting the porch in gentle shades of amber and gold. Inside, the warm glow of lamps created cozy pools of light as Graham carefully hung Tessa's framed sketch on the wall. The drawing showed this very porch, with 2 figures sitting together, not perfect, but filled with love in every pencil stroke. In the kitchen, Tessa hunched over a dozen chocolate cupcakes, her tongue poking out in concentration as she piped swirls of vanilla frosting. Graham stood at the sink, washing mixing bowls and stealing glances at his daughter, still amazed by how natural that word felt now. So tell me more about this history project, Graham said, drying his hands on a dish towel. "We're studying the Great Depression," Tessa replied, adding a final flourish to a cupcake. "I'm focusing on how people got creative with cooking when they didn't have much." Graham chuckled. "Sounds right up your alley." "The garden's coming along nice," Tessa observed, glancing out the window at the neat rows Graham had planted. "Those tomatoes are huge. Just wait till you taste them," he promised. Their laughter filled the kitchen, easy and comfortable like it had always belonged there. Later, they knelt together beside Tessa's bed for prayers, their nightly ritual now as natural as breathing. Tessa's voice was soft but sure. "Thank you, God, for giving me a family that doesn't weigh me down. It lifts me up instead." When Graham checked on her later, Tessa was sound asleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight. Above her bed, the corkboard labeled "Future" displayed fresh sketches, dress designs, bakery layouts, dreams taking shape in pencil and paper. Graham quietly closed the door, tears of joy gleaming in his eyes as he whispered, "Thank you, Emily." If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.